Shanti, good morning. Today, Baba's December 22nd, and Baba's taking up the distance and the movement between bhakti to gyan. And gyan is the fruit of devotion. But still, to make that transition from bhakti to gyan is to make shifts on a very deep level. And there are elements of bhakti that are quite relevant in gyan, but those elements are very subtle. And the gross elements and the concepts, they are no longer needed, but the subtle things, they need to be transformed. So let us see how Baba talks to us about this today. The essence, sweet children, the Father has come to give you the fruit of your devotion. The fruit of devotion is knowledge. And through knowledge, you receive sadgati. So the question, whom would you call seniors in this Brahmin clan? And what is the sign of being a senior? Are you seniors? It's a deep question, actually. So a senior doesn't mean that you're old. That's on a physical level. But a senior, Baba's giving a very interesting definition of what is the meaning of a senior. So the answer is those who do service very well are seniors in the Brahmin clan. So we have to think about what is a definition of service. They are constantly concerned about their own progress. They study and go ahead fast. Such Mahavir children use their bodies, minds, and wealth in a worthwhile way that is profitably for doing Baba's service. They pay a lot of attention to their activity. And the song is, you wasted your whole night sleeping and your whole day eating. Om Shanti. This song is incorrect. You didn't waste your night or your day. I don't know. I don't know what's in the rest of the song. Baba says, whatever you hear in this world, it is incorrect, false. The Father sits here and explains, O children, people of Bharat. And he says to the children who are personally in front of him, you now know that is the path of devotion. People have been studying the Vedas, Shastras, and Upanishads a lot on the path of devotion for birth after birth. They have been bathing in the Ganges. And when you ask them for how long the Kumbh Mela has been taking place, they will tell you that it has been going on since eternity. They cannot tell you when they started the Kumbh Mela. They do not know when the path of devotion begins. They have made the duration of the cycle incorrect. And you say millions of years, you can't divide it into two. How many is half millions of years? They say the day of Brahma and the night of Brahma are mentioned in the scriptures, but these are mentioned only in the Gita. The Father explains the day and the night of you Brahmins are unlimited. So day and night means half and half. So Baba's talking about calculation. And the cycle is the sign of division into half and half again. So there is the day for half the cycle and the night for half the cycle. The day and the night definitely have to be equal. No one knows that the path of devotion began half a cycle ago. When was the Sumnat temple built? The Sumnat temple is supposed to be the first temple ever built. So the Sumnat temple was the first one to be built for unadulterated worship. That means worship of Shiv Baba alone. You know, the night of Brahma begins when half the cycle comes to an end. So it cannot be a matter of hundreds of thousands of years. They say it was 13 to 1400 years ago that Muhammad Ghaznavi looted the treasures from the temple of Sumnat. So you understand that you no longer have any connection with the old world. Those of all the other religions that come in between are byplots. So in a classical drama, there are 5 acts, and there's the main plot, and then there's a few byplots. This is normal in classical drama. So it is now the end of those religions also. They have all become Tamil Pradhan. There are many varieties, different religions. Those of the Sun dynasty became the Moon dynasty when there were 2 degrees less. After that, other varieties continued to come down. So when he says varieties, if you see the picture, the old picture of the tree, you will see that the different religions corresponded to different races. And of course now it's not like that, but there was a time when it was something like that. At this time, it is the path of devotion. Through knowledge, there is the day, happiness, whereas through devotion, there is the night, sorrow. Knowledge can only be received when devotion comes to an end. Only the One Father, the ocean of knowledge, gives knowledge. No one knows when he comes or when the birth of Shiva is celebrated. Baba now sits here and explains to you for how long devotion continues and when you then receive knowledge. The path of devotion has continued since half the cycle. There are no images or pictures of the path of devotion in the golden and silver ages. So we can't say there's anything like the deity religion. It's a dharma, it's a civilization. No trace of devotion is there. Now, it is the end of the Iron Age, so this is the time when God has to come. And no one can find God in between. They say, we do not know in what form we will find God. So if Krishna were the God of the Gita, then when would he come to teach Raj Yoga? So Krishna's time is the golden age. You don't need to learn Raj Yoga in the golden age. People do not know anything. The path of devotion is quite separate from the path of knowledge. In the Gita, it says, Shri Bhagwan Uvach, as the first part of the Gita. It doesn't say Krishna Bhagwan Uvach. Shri Bhagwan Uvach. So then they also sing, O purifier, come. So on the one hand, they continue to call out for the purifier, and on the other hand, they go and bathe in the Ganges to get purified. They do not have any understanding as to who the purifier, the Supreme Soul, is. You children have now received knowledge, and you know that you are now attaining Sadgati through the power of yoga. Baba says, constantly remember me alone, and then your sins will be neutralized. I guarantee this. The Father says, the Purifier Father says, I also said 5,000 years ago, O children, break the yoga of your intellects, that means your focus of attention, away from all bodily beings and remember me. So focus of attention means that you have expectations from them. These are the elevated words of the Gita, but no one knows when I spoke the Gita. I am telling you that I spoke the Gita to you 5,000 years ago. At this time, the entire human world tree has reached a stage of total decay. The Father has now come and explained to you the secrets of the beginning, the middle, and the end of the drama and the whole cycle. Did you not have a tree fall down in Anubhuti?
Oh, yeah.
That means it was decayed.
It uprooted.
Yeah, so it just fell down. So this one also would just fall down. The Father would definitely come at the end. You know how establishment of the new world and destruction of the old world are taking place. It is now in your intellects that you will become the masters of the new world of heaven. This is Raja Yoga. So why would you become Praja? You have to become kings. Since Mama and Baba become the queen and the king, why shouldn't you become kings and queens? Mama was young, and this Baba is old. Right? Mama was 17 when she came in Gyan. Baba was about 54. Nevertheless, he has studied more than anyone else. The young ones should be the cleverest. Baba says, simply remember me alone as much as possible and forget everyone else. Have disinterest in the old world. Disinterest has a number of meanings. In English, it means you don't have a stake in it. But that's the actual meaning of disinterest. It doesn't mean you're not interested. It means you don't have a stake. It's a specific meaning of disinterest. But vairagya doesn't mean disinterest. Vairagya means that you get that what the world presents itself to you as is not it. That's vairagya. And vairagya is also an emotion that you get when you realize that you've been deceived by something promised you so much, and then you realize it isn't. Especially the human body, when people die and they see that the body is just, going into a barbecue. Funeral is about like that, right? And this is not it. This is not what the person is. When a new building is built, your intellects go in that direction. You're able to see that with your eyes, whereas you recognize this with your intellects. Many people have visions. Have you had visions? No. Touchings, indications, dreams. All BKs have something, right? So truly, it is called Vaikunt, paradise, heaven. It is said that whatever you have a vision of is a memory. And so part of Baba's key to the visions is he can unlock memories that you can't unlock otherwise. You can't remember what you saw in the Golden Age. So these memories let you have more faith that, yeah, I remember this. Sometimes you get déjà vu experience. This is also memory in advance, and the other is memory from the back. So heaven definitely existed at some time, but the world is no longer heaven. You are now studying Raj Yoga in order to attain your sovereignty. The first and foremost aspect is that God Shiva is speaking. Krishna cannot be God. Krishna takes the full 84 births, and it is very clear that God cannot enter the cycle of birth and death. God is not a human. He does not come in the path of death and rebirth. He does not decline. Krishna does. The same form of Krishna that is there in the Golden Age cannot exist at another time. While taking rebirth, his name and form change. And at this time, that soul is Tamo Pradhan. Then they say that Krishna existed in the Copper Age. He lived in the Copper Age. However, he cannot have the same form in the Copper Age that he has in the Golden Age. He cannot come to purify the impure in the Copper Age. Because after the Copper Age comes the Iron Age, so that's not very successful. Krishna only lives in the Golden Age. He cannot be called the purifier. So the God of the Gita is not Krishna, but Shiva. And he definitely comes. People celebrate the birth of Shiva. So if you get born, it means you're there. So that means he would definitely enter a body. He himself says, I enter an ordinary body and I name him Brahma. The world of Vishnu is established through Brahma. And the Mahabharata war is also in front of you. Keep this knowledge in your intellects very carefully. I don't know if you know, but the latest information is that China is competing with USA for nuclear capacity and other military levels. So, and Russia also. So we're getting there. Your intellect should remember that you are students and the Father is teaching you. Very little time remains. Baba will then take us back with him. Those who make themselves elevated means pure, will claim a high status. But Maya is such that it makes you crazy. Many children have a lot of interest in doing service, and they go with projectors and do service in small villages. They create many subjects, and so they themselves will definitely become kings. While living at home with your families, you must also remain pure. Much effort must be made. When women decide to practice purity, their husbands do not allow them, and so they engage in conflict. When sannyasis want to practice purity, they leave their wives, and nobody tells them anything like, "Why did you run away and leave your wife and children behind?" No one has the right to prevent anyone from practicing purity. We also do not tell anyone to leave his or her home and family. We simply say, you should practice purity. So, how can they be forbidden to do that? Still, a lot of courage is required to speak in this way. And God is speaking. He says, if you do practice purity, you will become masters of the pure world. A very good, strong stage is required. There should not be any attachment, which would make you continue to remember them. So once you leave someone, it's difficult for sannyasis because they remember their families. But once you leave someone for God, you have to leave them in your mind. When your intellects continue to be drawn in yoga to your families, you cannot achieve that competence for doing service. Here, unlimited renunciation is required. This world is a graveyard. We must remember the Father. He is the one who takes us to the world of angels. Well, Paristan, yes, Golden Age. Those who do service well in this Brahmin clan are seniors. You must give them a lot of regard. Do service like they are, and then you'll claim a high status. Now be concerned about your own progress. Check and see whether you have become able to receive the inheritance from Baba. The Father has come to purify you and take you back with him. How would he reject you? He would not reject you. When Baba asks you, you will say, I will become an empress. So let there also be behavior accordingly. Some children are very good, but what status would you get if you don't make effort? In every respect, it is only by making effort that you receive a reward. In a school, if a student falls ill, as soon as he recovers, he engages himself day and night in his studies and then goes fast again. Here too, engage yourselves in doing service. Baba tells you many methods of serving. Practice explaining at the exhibitions. Baba says, make progress and create your life. Be concerned about how much service you do and how many you make like yourself. How can you claim a high status if you don't make others like yourself? Now, this is like a system in business, that you come in business at the bottom of the ladder and you rise up through the ranks. And then the system of family business in India has a lot of family business. So you're in the business, you're also in the family. So you have to rise up through the family as well as through the business. It depends on how good you are in the business and how competent you are at handling the family. And then that way you rise up through the ranks. But you can't rise to another level unless you can create someone who does what you did in the lower level. So this is what he's talking about. So if you don't do that, it will be understood that you will be part of the subjects or maids or servants. It's a hierarchy. A lot of service has to be done. Your tree is still small. It is not yet strong. So in India, when you use the word strong, this refers to large numbers. So people ask you, what is your strength? They're not talking about your muscles or your intellectual prowess, but how many people you've got. That's the meaning of strong. So as soon as storms come, the weak ones fall. Maya distresses many a great deal, and Maya has the duty to turn you away from Baba. And while moving along, when those omens are removed, so the omens of Rahu, this is your karmic account. So you get deviated from Baba by having to go and handle some karmic accounts, and then you come back again when that's over. So you say that you will claim your full inheritance from Baba and that you will serve fully with your bodies, minds, and money. Wealth. In some cases, Maya makes you make mistakes and you stop following Srimat. And then, when you remember again, you start following Srimat again. At this time, it is the community of Ravan throughout the world. The deities are the community of Ram. And people of the community of Ravan bow their heads to those of the community of Ram. Not very often, but maybe they will. You know that you were the masters of the world. Now, see your condition after you have taken 84 births. The Father is now enabling all of you to make effort. Otherwise, you will have great repentance that you did not follow God's Srimat. Baba explains every day, children, do not be careless. You can see how those who do service are serving very well. So-and-so is a serviceable soul of the first grade. Another one is a serviceable soul of the second grade. There is a difference. The Father would give correct advice to children. On the path of bhakti, the Father would slap his child. Here, the unlimited Father explains to you with love, no violence permitted in the Brahman world. Make progress for yourselves. Continue to make effort in whatever way you can. The Father is pleased that he has come and met you children again after 5,000 years and teaching Raj Yoga. There is a song, you are the same one and we are the same ones. The Father says, you are the same children of mine. No one else can understand these things. Acha, to the sweetest beloved, long lost and now found children, love, remembrance, and good morning. From the mother, the father, Bap Dada, and the spiritual father says, Namaste to the spiritual children. The spiritual children say Namaste to the spiritual father. So the essence, first of all, make yourself worthy, capable, competent of doing service. Give regard to those who do service well, and be concerned about your own progress. Secondly, do full service with your body, mind, and wealth. Follow Shrimat and do not be careless. The blessing is, may you set yourself on the seat of a Master Almighty Authority. What does that mean, a Master Almighty Authority? It means Sarva Shaktivan. That means you have all the 8 powers. And secondly, authority means that you understand the knowledge. So those are 2 meanings of Master Almighty Authority. So easily and constantly remain a karma yogi. When you set a machine, once it's been set, it will continue to function automatically. In the same way, once you set yourself in the stage of a Master Almighty Authority, then words of weakness will not emerge. Words of weakness occur from conditioning. And Baba's giving us different conditioning. Every thought, word, and action will automatically continue to emerge according to that setting. So that setting will easily and constantly make you a karma yogi, an easy yogi, who constantly stays in the stage of being free from impure thought. And the slogan is, to say Baba Baba instead of I is a proof of remembrance. How does that work? In some cases, people commend you for what you're doing. And if you accept it and say, yeah, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, then you haven't understood that it all comes from Baba, right? But if you change your vocabulary and stop using the word I for normal things, then you look weird. So don't do that. It's a matter of understanding. So there's a short Murli. This meaning of Master Almighty Authority, many people ask, what does it mean? Because in English, sometimes for Sarva Shaktivan, you would use the word omnipotent. Actually is an actual well, yeah, that's what it means, omnipotent. Sarva Shaktivan means omnipotent. Omnipotent is a Latin word meaning you have all powers. Almighty means Sarva Shaktivan, but Almighty means you have a lot of power. But omnipotent means you have all powers. So in that sense, I would call it a more accurate word of Sarva. Sarva Shaktivan means all powers. And Almighty doesn't mean all powers. Almighty means strong. Generally, when Baba uses the word authority, it doesn't have anything to do with authoritarian. Some people don't know that. But authority means that you know what you're talking about. So if you're an authority of the scriptures, you've read them, you remember them, and you can quote them. If you are an authority on Ayurvedic medicine, it means you know your stuff. If you are an authority on skiing, you know about skiing. So authority has to do with knowing your subject really well.
I was pondering the slogan. Baba was saying, not to have, we're overcoming this I. It should be Baba and not I. But then if I perform any action and someone praises it and I say Baba did it, or, people will kind of go, well, who's Baba? Or they'll know right away if you say Baba did it, that you did it. And you're disguising it with a humble verbiage. But anyway, I was thinking the way to, because you kind of pose something, how do you overcome it in a way that is natural and normal? And so I thought that the opportunity or the way to gauge if you've overcome ego is how well you handle defamation.
Well, that's exactly right. But when you say, you don't have to say Baba did it out loud. When he says say, it means understand. Understand that the source of your capability of doing service was Baba. But there's many BKs who say, well, Baba made the bread, and Baba made the bhog, and then Baba offered it to Baba. It's like, excuse me, what's going on here? You lost the plot. But there are people who take the words literally at the expense of their intelligence. And so that needs to be looked at. What Baba's talking about is there are BKs who learn this knowledge and then they want to become the gurus. And Baba is like forgotten totally. And I am telling you this and la, 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 la. That's what he's referring to. So the strange thing is that people who need to hear what he's saying don't, and people who don't do that think that they do, think that they're putting themselves in front of Baba. So this is just a phenomenon. But still, Baba has to say that because of who it's referring to. And ego, as you rightly say, is, Baba had defined it as the feeling of being insulted when someone tells you the truth. And then they will accuse you of doing some wrong action. And you have to be sharp because their accusation will be their reaction, an ego reaction. In law, it comes up where people blame the victim. That's a very clear example of ego. They won't accept that you did this crime. They say, no, this victim made me do this crime. Excuse me. Or sometimes people say, you made me angry. No, you got angry all by yourself. A person annoyed you, okay, that's up to them, but you got angry all by yourself. There's your ego reaction to get angry in that way. So, yeah. But you see, many people think that using the word I means ego, but it doesn't. It's just a pronoun for yourself. If you do things like have a reaction because you feel insulted, you will say, I am the senior, therefore you should respect me. This is a very good example of ego. Lots of people do that because they want to be considered higher than someone else.
Or higher than their qualification.
Well, definitely higher than their qualifications, but they want other people to behave in such a way that it massages their ego. And so they will spread that in their family because they're the boss, or they'll spread that in their company if they're the boss. And so people like to be in a position of power because they can get this thing. You know, Baba talks about man shan ka bukha, you're hungry for respect and honor.
What was that again?
Man shan ka bukha, hungry for honor and respect, and you've got to do this and lower yourself in front of them. This is a very, very common behavior, which is indication that the person has zero self-respect. Because if you are in your power and if you respect yourself, why do you need anybody to respect you? They will naturally respect you, wouldn't they? Of course they will. But a person who actually has no self-respect will behave in that way, because you have to have a compensation for no self-respect. And what is the foundation of your self-respect? It's very interesting to think about. What makes you respect yourself is if you do what you're supposed to do, you will respect yourself. If you don't do what you're supposed to do, this will eat away at your self-respect.
It shouldn't be that your self-respect or your whatever authority that you claim would be threatening to anyone. It shouldn't be that you separate yourself from others.
People are different. And it is the case that someone who is a big authority is threatening to someone else. Not that they threaten them, but they are perceived as a threat because the person compares themselves, and then they feel less than. And that's also because of their ego. You see, because, you know, if you see someone who's really, really good at what they do, you honor them, you respect them, you give them regard. That's pretty good. But it doesn't mean that you diminish yourself in comparison with them. Sometimes you may remember Daddy Genki used to talk a lot about don't compare yourself. And then people didn't quite understand what is the meaning of don't compare yourself, because these things are very deep, but many people take it very superficially. And when you take it superficially, you take it as like a behavior. And it means you really haven't understood anything. You need to go deeper in this. So don't compare yourself means don't look at a person and evaluate yourself in comparison with that other person, because your value has nothing to do with the other person. So not comparing yourself is in comparison with this person, I'm high. In comparison with that person, I'm low. So why are you relativizing yourself? Because it's nothing to do with what you actually are. So sometimes Baba had said, if you really want to compare yourself and evaluate yourself in comparison with someone, compare yourself with Brahma Baba. And so if you compare yourself with Brahma Baba, what you know about Brahma Baba is many stories about what he did and what happened to him and how he handled what happened to him, things like this, right? And so you will see, okay, am I doing the BK practice? Compare yourself with Brahma in that way, because he did the BK practice, right? And he understood the knowledge. He churned. Are you churning? If you're not churning, you don't compare well with Brahma Baba, right? He handled a lot of defamation. So if anybody defames you, you can compare yourself with Brahma Baba that he handled it. So if I have to handle it, it's okay, you see.
I'm still benevolent.
Still benevolent. Yeah. So it's very worthwhile to compare yourself with Brahma Baba. Because anyway, he's number one. So there's no way you can be higher than Brahma Baba because he's already been evaluated by Shiv Baba, which is another thing I wanted to mention to you in terms of the word Almighty. In BKs, they used to say Almighty Baba for Shiv Baba and Baba for Brahma Baba. And this is, you see, BK language is different from regular language. Any community, especially a closed community as we are, will create their own language. And then it becomes jargon. And then if you start using that language in the general world, it looks weird. And if you want to be included in the general world, then you have to understand that there is a certain BK jargon that BKs use who have developed that in a closed community, but it only applies in that closed community. And if you're talking to the rest of the world, you shouldn't use that language because they won't know what you're talking about. You know. And another closed community that uses specific language is the medical community. You know, when we are in the hospital and talking to the neurologist and all this, and he starts using letters of the alphabet to refer to certain procedures, and then he catches himself and says, oh, you don't know what I'm talking about. What I mean is this, this, this. He puts it in normal English, right? Because among themselves, they use their own little shortcuts, short language. Or in legal circles, they use certain words that's only for law. This is all called jargon. So BKs do it just as well as anybody else. But then if you're talking in the regular world, they will think you're a bit weird because you use language differently.
It creates exclusivity. You want to be exclusive. You want to be, even the theater people would do this. They have their jargon. Yeah. So I'm special because, you know.
Exclusivity, but even without thinking about exclusivity, it just becomes the norm.
So I have a question around the ego part, the relationship between respecting one's time and ego, right? When somebody does not honor a set time, and then you gave some time to somebody, they didn't come up, right? That could be a trigger point. And then next time they have that experience that, oh, they don't respect me because they didn't respect my time. And managing the time and the respect and ego are all intertwined. I want to expand a little bit.
What happens is you have to have conventions. And that's different from ego reaction. So if you have a convention, that the convention is, I give you an appointment at X time, it may be the convention to be 5 minutes late, or there are other conventions 5 minutes early. There are other conventions exactly on time. And this depends on the social circle that you are in. And if somebody breaks those conventions, because it's an agreement that has been broken, the reaction to breaking the agreement would not be an ego reaction, but it would be a challenge to your carelessness, which is not the same. And if a person doesn't challenge your carelessness, it means they're condoning it, which means they're not doing their job correctly. They have to challenge you because you broke a convention. It's like most of these agreements, social agreements, are unwritten. And you remember yesterday's Murli where Baba said about the boy who was engaged to be married, and then he came in Gyan and wanted to be celibate. Then he has to get a contract signed because the agreement of the society in which he's part is that he doesn't have the right to be celibate if he gets married, because all the other people around him are going to force him to produce a child, not just his wife. His wife may agree, but the document that is signed also means that the other people in the family are bound by that document. You see, that's an official agreement. And in the way in which we interact with each other, whenever there's some problem or some issue comes up, then it's a good idea to sit together and discuss it and work out a convention so that everybody knows what is expected of them. And that's very different from somebody having an ego reaction. You create an agreement, or you create house rules. Like when we have a program, you say, I'm going to do the house rules. You got to turn off your mobile phone. You got to this and that, and leave by a certain time and come by a certain time, or whatever. You make rules. And then people agree to those rules. And if you break those rules, then someone is rightfully going to challenge you about that. And that's not an ego reaction. Maybe the way they challenge you may contain a bit of ego, but this is all to do with diplomacy. And in India, the word diplomacy means intrigue and manipulation. But in English, it means you agree. This is how you conduct yourself. That's the meaning of diplomacy. And diplomacy is a very important virtue and needs to be discussed also, that what is okay and what is not okay. And if somebody breaks a convention, even in your discussion about setting up conventions, you also look at what will happen if you break that convention. Someone's going to come after you, you see. So if we say class starts at XYZ time, then that's an agreement. So we have to abide by that agreement. And there may be certain reasons why it's late or whatever. But, and people will be flexible about slight deviations from the agreement, but there's a limit. And when things get beyond that limit, they'll come after you. And that's not agreement. That's not ego. That is, you broke the agreement big time, and there are consequences, you see. And if you don't set up these conventions, your system won't work. Like we have a lot of use of the internet, and you pay the internet provider for a certain number of bytes and gigabytes and terabytes and whatever, and they don't give it to you. You don't like it, right? Because they're not fulfilling their agreement, that they can get away with it because it's so complicated that most people don't realize they're being gypped, But those who are sharp and smart, they will go back to that provider and say, hey, I'm paying for this and you're giving me half of this. What's going on? Right? So this is the same thing. That's not an ego reaction. That's making sure that the agreements are getting fulfilled. Like when you get your driving license, you have to go by the highway code. And if you don't, and you break that agreement, which is why you got your driving license, The police will come along and say, hey, you did speeding, you crossed the red light, this, that, and the other. You broke the agreement, so there's consequences. So in BK, one thing heavily missing is accountability. Missing. When there is no accountability, then it's possible to start doing things that are wrong. And so accountability and some kind of a convention for accountability is good because it keeps the machinery flowing properly. And Baba talked about the machine in the a blessing. That once you set a machine, like we have here, these automatic pressure cookers, right? And you tell the pressure cooker, okay, you will start cooking in 20 minutes from now, and you will stop cooking in 50 minutes from now. And it will do it. And if it doesn't do it, you don't like it, right? You say, this is a bad machine. So in the same way, we make agreements with people. So, for example, there are rules for coming to Madhaban. You have to, well, there are conventions about the clothing, don't come. A very amusing thing happened one time in Brazil, Rio. Because in Rio, the beach is everything, right? And so they said, oh, you have to wear white to the class. So they came in white bikinis, because that's the normal clothing. Yes, it's true. And so, but then, why do people wear white sari and the brothers wear kurta pajama? Because they sat together and they decided this will be our dress, And there was a time when Daddy Janki said, well, we have to find a good design of clothing for people who are Western. And because putting Western people in white saris is inappropriate in that society. If you put a Hindu in a white sari in India, it's shocking, but at least they understand you're either a widow or a sannyasi. It has that meaning. But you put that in another part of the world, and it looks like you belong to a cult. And that's it. Everything has a meaning depending on the culture where you do it. Anyway, she didn't like any of the designs we proposed, so it didn't happen. But it's nevertheless a good idea. And so every time circumstances change, you have to renegotiate the agreements. That's normal, because when the circumstances are different, then the agreements are no longer relevant. So you have to make new agreements, right? And the process of sitting together and making an agreement means you have to arrive at consensus. Everybody has to agree, and you have to listen to all the pros and cons and all of this. And then it ends up with, okay, this is the agreement. And if you don't do that, then individuals who are pushy will impose their convenient ways, what's convenient to them. And then everybody else has to adjust to it. But that's not necessarily a good idea, because it creates resentment. It creates bad impression to the outside world, who says, what is this? This doesn't look very functional to us. And so it's very, very necessary to work out these agreements and clarify them. And it's useful to write things down once you have arrived at a decision. And I had a situation like this in India, which was quite interesting, that there were in one of the departments where I was, there were meetings, regular meetings. And so there were decisions made in those meetings, and I would take notes because it's normal in my background to take notes of what the decisions are in the meeting, because nobody else was. So I thought, hey, a problem here. And exactly that problem happened. The boss would change the decisions immediately after the meeting. And I would challenge it and say, look, you made this decision. Now you reversed it. What is this? He said, I'm the boss. I said, it doesn't matter. You can't do that. That's not okay. Because you cannot run an organization or a department in a tyrannical or autocratic manner without getting some kickback. You will get kickback. But if people operate on the basis of making everybody afraid, this is called tyranny. This is Tamil Pradhan way of doing things. So it's not going to be successful, right? How will it be successful? It's not sustainable. It's not Baba's way. It will be challenged. Of course. So the way Brahma Baba did things was setting standards. And after Brahma Baba, we had Dadi Prakash Mani, and she made many, many changes in the yagya because it went from this tiny little, very closed community to something really quite big and international. Under Dadi Prakash Mani, it really changed. And so the methods and standards and so on also changed correspondingly, you see. So leadership also is connected with setting standards, but those standards have to be consensual. It means everybody has to sit down and agree to it. And if you don't agree to it and it gets imposed on you, you will not comply. How will you comply? You don't agree. But if you are included in the consensus building and you work out something that is workable, and according to the research that has been done on this consensus building, you need 40 people in a group to decide. And when you have 40 people, you cover all the possible angles of vision. It's included in 40 people they found. So it's not too big. But sitting in a meeting with 40 people and arrive at consensus would take you 3 or 4 days. But if you have a good facilitator, it can be done. But the thing is, you need to bear in mind that people are very different. And when you have a lot of people working together on something, you need to know very well what the priorities are. You need to know why you're doing what you're doing and how you're doing it, and is it functional? You have to take all this into consideration. And, now we have a new situation, which is all this COVID. And so what have we done is we have adjusted. Everybody's more or less adjusted. We do Zooming instead of the other. And some people try different ways of putting the old systems back into a new situation. And some people are more creative and take advantage of new possibilities. But what's really needed when a situation is really different is you have to sit down and talk about it and decide what the conventions are now. So for most people, the government said you've got to have this many people only, you've got to have masks, you've got to have jabs, you've got to have this, you've got to have that. So the government will impose its rules, but even then you decide your rules within that. And that then you go along with that. And then if it doesn't work, then you have to sit together and have a look at what doesn't work and why it doesn't work, and then come up with something that will work. Is that right? This is how things are done. And in the early days of BKs, this is what they did, you know. And they would, you know, when I was first going to Madhuban, and it was only 4 or 5 years after Baba, right? And so they were still in process of setting up new systems. So many times, Daddy would ask me my opinion about things, because coming from another culture and all that. And because when circumstances change, you have to do that. And it might take a little while when you have like an epochal change. So right now in BKs, we have an epochal change because we have no more Baba, no more Daddies. That's an epochal change. And people are circumstantially is COVID, along with no more Baba and no more Daddies, right? So this is very interesting, and many people remark how interesting it is, because it gives the BKs time to figure out what's next. And COVID is carrying on because maybe people haven't figured out what's next. But in the worldly world, during these couple of years, what's next seems to be severe extreme weather that has really increased, and the economic serious problems has really increased, and migration has really increased. And this is in the last couple of years, or 2, 3, 4, 5 years. The world has changed under this blanket of COVID, where everybody has to sit at home and hope for the best, right? But it's definitely a time to sit down and say, okay, now what exactly is the new situation, and how do we function in that new situation, so that we can clarify what are our aims and objectives and how we do it, right? So this is, then you can arrive at, it's a kind of culture of this is how we do things. It's okay. But accountability is a very important agreement, a part of the agreement, because if someone is not going along with it, what will happen to them? At the moment, nothing will happen. You know, but is that a good idea or not? Up until now, there have been rules, you know, if you do this, you can't come to Madhuban for X number of days or whatever. Certain rules are there. But when people become very lax and make exceptions all over the place, then it changes the atmosphere, right? And then you lose the clarity about who you are and what you're doing. So reviewing all these things is useful, interesting, relevant. No?
Please ask Dennis Ben on what does that mean in detail, not to have a stake in the old world.
Not to have a stake in the old world is to do with people's way of, like they say, okay, we have to provide for our descendants. We have to create a lot of money so that our children, grandchildren, etc., can live from that. And so Baba says, well, the state of the world is such that it's not a good idea to do that, because Someone's money will be taken by the government, someone will be looted by thieves, etc., etc. So use your resources for Baba's work. And Baba's work means that you are also creating your fortune for yourself for many, many births. You hear this many times. People say, okay, I'm going to buy lottery tickets, and then if I win, I'll put that in Baba's yagya. Of course, the lottery is designed to lose. So Baba says, wake up. What are you thinking? Why you think that you suddenly can become a massive donor and get all kinds of ego out of that? That's nothing to do with Gyan, as example. It's like there's a difference between the things that you do in Gyan, your connection with meditation and study and all of this. So it tells you, okay, this is where you should put your time and energy and so on, because it's an investment. You invest in the old world, you lose, or you'll get very little. You invest in this, it's a very high risk because it's so invisible, but is a very, very high return. And so if you recognize what this is, then you would take full advantage. And those who don't really recognize what this is, they're still caught up in the old world, the old social ways and so on. But you have to decide for yourself, this is not something that you do on the basis of what somebody else tells you. We have the knowledge, we have access to the Murli fully, and then you decide what you're going to do. Sometimes Baba uses the expression, you have raised your anchor from the Iron Age, and you're on the ship, and you're crossing the salty channel to go to the other side. And this is about the confluence age, so like for example, we practice celibacy. That means we're not in the business of creating lots of children and grandchildren and that whole thing. That's not a priority for us, but it is a priority in the regular old world because they want continuity. Whereas for us, we say, well, we know that there's going to be extreme hardship. And so we need to brace ourselves for that. And we know that the world is changing. And so if you invest in something that's going away, you won't get anything out of it. But you invest in what's coming, you will. It's really that.
On the contract diplomacy thing, I mean, even in technology, that's what we do. Systems comply with that rules that we set up. Whereas people, we break those conventional contracts or morality, and it makes things very entangled. And coming back to the contract of spirituality, what Baba enforces, like your pure soul come from that place and interact from there. And it makes
this is why it's worthwhile to sit down and talk about the social contract, because it's a social contract. And the social contract in India was defined in the Manusmriti, which I mentioned from time to time. And that was based on the concept of caste and gender differentiation and a lot of views about what's what, which are no longer current. And so if people are going along with that system in the modern world, there's a clash between the modern conventions and the old conventions, or it's a clash between a feudal angle on life and a democratic angle on life. And then what we need to do among ourselves is to really think about what Baba means by Brahman culture, because he did bring in that word at some point. And then people started thinking, what is Brahman culture? But it has not been defined and definitely not codified. So it's worthwhile whenever it's relevant, whenever circumstances change, to sit down and define the social contract among ourselves. It's really worthwhile, because then you air things that normally you don't speak about because you don't think you're allowed to, or you don't think you should, or somebody might not like it, or something like this. But when I was doing this program in India called the Diploma of Education in Values and Spirituality, we did this every day with the groups. And I was asked to work with the young sisters in the centers in India. And I had a group of, I don't know how many it was, maybe 50 or something like that. And it was in the monsoon time, so they gave us sukdam. So we had our classes and everybody was sleeping there. So it was like a very closed group, and we were a month together, something like that. And they learned, the girls learned how to discuss using these protocols that are what I call no gas, no generalization, no accusation, no speculation, and no speeches, because these are the four main problems everybody has: generalization, accusation, speculation, and speeches. And speeches means you keep saying the same thing, repeating and repeating. I call that a speech. You only have to say it once. And actually looking at different subjects that are important, concerned with the topic we were considering. And they learned very well how to use these methods, which were worked out actually in California in the 1980s. But there are plenty of researchers who have understood that there's a problem around this, and they researched it, and they came up with methods to handle it, which are quite good and can be used in order to go from unclarity to clarity, from operating at, where you have a number of different cultures and you don't sit down and define the social contract. Everyone will operate according to the assumptions of their cultural background. There's no alternative. But when you sit down and talk about it, then the differences, the cultural differences, can be flagged up. And that in my culture, this signal means this. And someone will say, oh, really? In my culture, it means that. Same signal, different meaning. And this is why you get misunderstandings when you have a very multicultural world, which we do have.
Yeah. So, same thing in corporate. Diversity brings innovation, and
Definitely.
they always showcase Japan, even though it is smart, no innovation because no diversity of ideas, and culture brings that diversity.
So what I'm seeing from these different comments is that there is not clarity between self-respect and ego. One of the biggest problems we have is translation. And along with that, jargon. So this is why we have to define these things. when Baba says, stay on your seat of self-honor, it means don't forget who you are. You know, wisdom is something that arrives slowly, slowly over time. When you are constantly, daily, for a whole lifetime, looking at this material in the context of community, of karmic accounts with your lokics and with your alokics and all of this. And slowly you arrive at a way of working that's manageable. It takes time to arrive at that. When you take this knowledge theoretically, and then you mix it into your preconceptions, and then you get something which is not very wise. So we do have to make clear to ourselves what our assumptions and preconceptions are and see whether they're valid or not, because a lot of the time they're not valid. And then we have to be very clear about the definitions of things. And people will take an expression from the Murli, which is translated from one language to another, to another, to another, in which a lot of the meaning gets lost in translation. And they will take that to be a rule. And then they will teach that. And other people will accept that that's a rule. But actually, it's like Chinese whispers. You know how Chinese whispers goes? And so this is why it's just good that we have our class every day and we sit down and we listen to what Baba says, and then we take up the different points that come up and try to clarify things so that it corresponds with what he's telling us. So we have Brahma Baba, we have the Dadis who had pretty clear understanding of this, but now that it's spread out all over the place and many people are teaching with not much background, and they say things which don't correspond with what another teacher will say. So it becomes very confusing for people. So this is something that is good to work out. Very good to work out. So to be continued, I would say. We will meet again tomorrow. So I think we will leave it at that. Om Shanti.